This is part 2 of the virtual lectures for section 25.4 Evo-Devo. And in this presentation, we're going to talk about how the study of the Pax6 gene indicates that different types of eyes evolved from a simpler form. So, evolutionary biologists have had a pretty tough time trying to explain how a complex organ comes into existence in the first place. For example, why does a limb or why does an arm or a leg come to be? And even Darwin himself admitted that understanding the evolution and development of the eye specifically wasn't easy. And so he hypothesized that the complex eyes that were currently present originated from much simpler structures. And so he said that the first eyes were probably made up of two types of cells. They were made up specifically of one photoreceptor cell and one pigment cell, so made up of two cells total. And as we all know today, eyesight and vision is a prevalent feature among most animals, and good eyesight is very advantageous. And so as time went on, eyes would become more complex by being able to absorb varying amounts of light and wavelengths, gaining a lens to focus with, etc., etc. And so, over the years, researchers have discovered many different types of eyes. And this has led them to propose that eyes may have actually independently arisen many times during their evolution. And so, at the time, this hypothesis seemed pretty legitimate. However, it was soon to be challenged, which we will go over in the following slides. And so more recently, when scientists began to study eye development, they found the Pax6 gene, which is a master control gene that controls the expression of many other genes and influences eye development, similar to the master control gene, which is that of a Hox gene. And the Pax6 gene is present in rodents and humans. And they also found a gene called eyeless, which is found in Drosophila, which are fruit flies, and it also induces eye development. And so what's interesting about Pax6 and eyeless genes are that they are homologous, which means that they were both derived from the same ancestral gene. And so keep that in mind for the upcoming slides, because we're going to see that. Okay, so in 1995, a geneticist named Walter Gehring was able to successfully show that expressing the eyeless gene in fruit flies, where it was usually inactive, so wherever the eyeless gene was not active, ended up in the development of additional eyes. So let me just repeat myself so you guys can understand that. Again, because I just want to reiterate that fact because it's very important. So Gehring found that expressing the eyeless gene in fruit flies, where it was normally inactive, ended up in the development of additional eyes. So that's pretty crazy if you think about it. So knowing this, he and his colleagues turned on the activation of the eyeless gene in a fruit fly where its antennae were supposed to grow, which we can see in this photo right here. And eventually, an eye grew there. So, as we can see looking at this photo, when the eyeless gene is expressed in the antennae region, when they expressed it there, an eye was formed where the antennae should have grown. So, that's pretty crazy. And so, they also experimented with the Pax6 gene of a mouse and found that by expressing it in fruit flies, it also resulted in the formation of eyes too. So let's take a look at this photo, and we can see that here we have a fly leg, and here we can see the eye. So when the mouse Pax6 gene was expressed in the leg region of a fruit fly, a small eye formed. So that's also pretty crazy. But one question you may ask is, why wasn't a mouse eye formed there instead? Because after all, the Pax6 gene is coming from a mouse. But we have to remember that the Pax6 gene is a master control gene that activates genes from the Drosophila genome, or the fruit fly genome. So after it activates genes from the fruit fly genome, then further regulatory genes will switch on genes that will then promote eye formation. And so that's the reason why a fruit fly eye was formed and not a mouse eye. And it's because of this experimentation that we are able to conclude that the eyes of Drosophila, or fruit flies, and mammals are evolutionarily derived from a modification of an eye that arose once during evolution. Because if Drosophila and mammalian eyes had arisen independently, the Pax6 gene from mice would not be expected to induce the formation of eyes in Drosophila. And so let's recall that Darwin hypothesized that the eyes from many different species were all evolved from a common ancestral gene form consisting of one photoreceptor cell and one pigment cell. We talked about that earlier. So let's keep that in mind. Darwin also said that over time, simple eyes evolved into complex eyes by modifications that resulted in additional cell types, such as lens cells and muscle cells. And we now know today that this is true. However, other researchers argue that Pax6 only controls eye development up to a certain extent, and that different types of eyes evolved independently, but that's only a small minority of them. And to finish off this presentation, here we have a diagram showing the evolution of the eye. And so here we can see genetic changes under the control of the ancestral Pax6 gene, which is located up here, which eventually led to the evolution of different eye types. So we can see here we start off with our simple eye, which Darwin proposed, made up of one photoreceptor cell and one pigment cell, and we have one ancestral Pax gene. And so throughout evolution, species eventually diverged from each other, but they still managed to retain a certain Pax6 homologue. So for fruit flies, they maintain the eyeless homologue, and mammals maintain the Pax6 gene. And so over time, genetic duplications along with many other sorts of genetic changes resulted in the formation of many more genes that contributed to eye complexity. And so these new genes that were being formed remained under the control of the Pax6 gene and its homologues. And now we're coming to the end of our presentation, and I hope from this virtual lecture you were able to gather that the Pax6 gene has been able to indicate to us that different types of eyes have evolved from one simpler form. And that's all.